Good morning, friends. My name is John Finnegan, and I'm here with Bill Inmon. Bill and I both live in Denver, Colorado, and Bill is known as the father of data warehousing by many in the IT profession. He is the author of more than 60 books, one of which I bought back in the mid 1990s when I had a company providing ERP implementation largely during that time. But the developers for this company encouraged me to buy this book, and it was life-changing for so many. Bill, thanks for being here with me this morning.
It's my pleasure, John.
Bill, you were born in California, but raised in Texas and ended up at an Ivy League school on the East Coast. How did that happen?
Quite by accident. I happened to be a player on a football team in Texas that was highly celebrated. We had two of our players ended up being drafted into the pros, and I played defensive end next to a defensive tackle that ended up playing for the Dallas Cowboys.
Wow.
And so they wouldn't even try to block me. They tried to block the guy playing next to me called Denny Brewer. So I got to run around the backfield, and I looked like I was a really, really good player because I was making tackles all over the field. And so when I got ready to graduate from high school, I had very, very high SAT scores, and I'd happened to play on this football team that recruiters, I mean, we had recruiters all over the football team. So Yale found out that I had high SAT scores and played defensive end, and that's why they recruited me.
I didn't know this about you because what we've talked about in the past is that you were also an extraordinary golfer and played quite well, played with the likes of Lee Trevino and Johnny Miller. And it's interesting to me because you had this aptitude for sports, but you also had this aptitude to mathematics. And you had to, at some point in time, choose between those two loves.
Well, I did that out of sheer necessity. I tried when I got out of school, I tried to play on the professional golf circuit for about a year. And then I got tired of starving to death. And so I was an assistant professional at a little country club in Shreveport, Louisiana, called Kirby's Park. And that's been many years ago. I was making the grand sum of $350 a month. And even back then, you couldn't live very well on $350 a month. And so after about a year of doing this, I cashed one check as a golfer. And I should have framed that check because that was the highlight of my career. But one day after about a year of getting tired of starving to death, I noticed that there was an ad in the paper for programmers. Well, back in the day when I was going to school, there weren't any courses to speak of in terms of programming or computer science or anything. And so I thought, well, let me go apply for this job. And I went and applied for the job in Shreveport for Western Electric, and I got hired as a programmer. And once I got into programming, I found out that it was really interesting and that I really loved it.
That's great. You and I are contemporaries, and we have seen so much change. You, in the depths of that profession, you've made changes to that profession. I, working for IBM as a sales representative, saw enormous change at that end. When I worked for IBM, there were systems engineers available to me, and it was my job to deploy those resources appropriately to get the job done in this commercial environment. But Bill, we've seen a democratization of information technology, and I'm reading Kai-Fu Lee's book right now, AI 2041, as an example, peeking 20 years into the future. And I can hardly believe it. As we get older, time, the dimension of time changes.
Well, it's everything has changed. The certainly the technology's changed, but the vendors have changed. The way sales are being made has changed. Who in the organization is buying technology has changed. The technical challenges have changed. Yes, it's a completely different world than it was in the early 1960s. I don't think there's any argument about that.
Yeah. And you had such a profound effect. I had mentioned to you earlier that I noticed in the New York Times on November 30th, there was a guest essay from Matt Pottinger and David Feith, who wrote, "The most powerful data broker in the world is winning the war against the United States." And what he's talking about is that President Biden came away from this most recent summit with Xi Jinping, and that took place on the 15th. And this is what they had to say. They said, "Data is the oil of the 21st century, the indispensable resource that will fuel artificial intelligence, algorithms, economic strength, and national power. The wellspring of this data is all of us, our health records, our genetic sequences, our online habits, the supply chain flows of our businesses, the terabytes of imagery guzzled by phones, drones, and autonomous cars." When you hear that, what does that make you think?
I'm going to give you an answer that's probably going to surprise you, but I have a company that's been doing something unique and innovative now for a number of years. We've talked to any number of companies and investors in the United States, and not one of them will even open the door for us. The only people that have been open to funding and backing what we do are the Chinese. We are talking to people whose ears are deaf in the United States. They just don't want to hear it. The Chinese, on the other hand, are most gracious and anxious to support the technology we have. So, as a businessman, now I'll tell you something. I'm probably the most patriotic American you're going to find. I love America, but I'm also a business person, and the Chinese are far easier and far more open-minded than Americans ever are. And I hate to say that. It pains me to say that, but that's
Yes.
the truth.
Now, I'm glad you did, because as you know, I have a focus group for CEOs. And last month, I asked one of our members, typically it's an outside third party like you making a presentation in the morning, but Nick Wang, who is a member of our group, is the CEO of a company in the travel industry. And he made a presentation that was eye-opening for all of us. He was born in Beijing, as you might expect. And he took us through the history through the course of his life. And it was for the purpose of us to not think so parochially, that our narrow parochial thinking, I think, is very dangerous. And the more that we can expand that, the better. And my first trip to China was in 1994 into the Guangdong province. Bill, I couldn't tell if buildings were going up or coming down in 1994. But boy, we've seen tremendous progress since then.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And in the United States, the venture capital community, the not just the venture capital community, the technology people have this mindset, and it's a one-tracked mindset, and anything that varies from the mindset is something that is not welcome, and they don't want to hear it, and that's dangerous. And
Yeah.
whose fault is that? That's not the Chinese's fault. That's
Right.
the Americans' fault.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a great segue for where I hope we can go in this conversation, because with your background and understanding of technology, um, I think you can help us as business leaders understand what is required of us in order to make better business decisions. And so we're all aware of the growth of data, and but the key is, how are we using this data? And that's the world in which you live. Bill, you don't need to work now. You've taken care of your retirement. I'm the same way, but we continue to have a need to remain relevant. And I'm putting words in your mouth right now. I'd like you to answer that question, why you continue to do what you do.
Well, first off, John, I do it because I love it and because I'm a stubborn person. The two most stubborn people in my life were my mother and my father. So I come by stubbornness honestly. But we do something. You're leading into to what we do. We do something. We take text and turn text into a standard database. Now, first off, that doesn't sound terribly exciting or interesting. The problem is that, or the issue is that it opens up the door to kinds of processing that haven't been able to be done before. Let me give you just one example, and this is one of many examples of the kind of doors that are open. Let's go to healthcare. The other day, I was in my doctor's office, and my doctor asked me what I did. And I said, well, I read text and turn text into a database. And he says, oh, that's interesting. Why would you want to do that? And I said to my doctor, I said, sir, let me ask you, what happens when you get a patient with a complicated set of conditions? What happen? What do you do? And he says, well, I try to find other doctors and other patients that have faced these same circumstances and find out what kind of treatments were effective for doing this. And I said, in your career as a doctor, how many documents did you ever read to try to research something useful for a patient? And he says, oh, I don't know, Bill, maybe at most 20 documents. And I said, how about if you could read in that same amount of time 1 million documents? And he said, Bill, I can't read 1 million documents. And I said, I know you can't, but the computer can. And when you take text and put text into the form of a database, now the computer can look at far more information than you ever could look at. And don't you think the chances of a good outcome for your patient are increased by being able to look at that many documents? And he says, "Oh, now I understand why turning text into a database is important."
Mm.
Now there's a lot of other reasons why it's important, but that's one very good one because I don't think anybody argues the fact that having good health and helping people maintain good health is one of the more noble things you can do in this life. And so that's just one example, John, of the many examples. Let me give you another quick example. I've talked to executives on a fairly frequent basis, and I asked them. I said, "Ma'am, sir, does your corporation have an 800 number for people to call in?" "Oh yeah, we have a call center." I said, "Well, that's good. Do you know what's going on in your call center?" "Oh yeah, we know what's going on in our call center." "Well, what's going on?" He says, "Well, we get 7,000 calls a day, and those calls last for 4.5 minutes." And I said, "Well, gee, that's interesting. What are people saying in the call center? Well,
Mhm.
what is it that they're saying? Are they complaining about something? Do they want to install something? Do they want to buy something? Do they have suggestions for improvement? What is it people are saying?" And the executive says, "Oh, sorry, Bill, we don't. You can't know that." And I said, "Oh, yes, you can know that. If you can take the text that people are talking about and put that into the form of a database, you can easily find out what people are saying in their call center." And information that's found in a call center is extremely valuable information if you will let it be valuable yourself. But those two examples in healthcare and call centers are just two of many examples of how text has not been used in our business world, in the world of business, in order to make and enhance decisions. So there's this enormous field waiting out there for people to look at and see, but they're so locked in to, well, we didn't do it that way yesterday, and yeah, you're right, you didn't do it that way yesterday because you couldn't, but today you can. But this is where the Chinese have an open mind and they see the opportunity, and Americans and venture capitalists and other people are simply locked into a way of thinking and their minds are closed.
I'm so glad you brought up that example because in 1996, 97, and 98, we built call centers for MasterCard and Sears.
Hmm.
And they spent several $1 million to do that. It was the big issue then was merging the worlds of telephony and data processing at the time. And it was all about getting it all hooked together. There was no consideration about extracting data other than numbers of calls or the length of the call. You're
Yep.
going a step further in your example. You're
And,
taking a deeper dive.
and and the good stuff is in the step further. I
Yes.
mean, the fact that you have a call center, that's interesting, but in terms of using it for decision making purposes, of answering the question, what is on your customer's mind? That's where the real value is, and people that have call centers simply are ignoring it.
Last week, AWS had their 10th reInvent conference. And Andy Jassy now didn't give the keynote because he's now been promoted into Jeff Bezos's position running Amazon. And so this week-long conference took place. I try to listen in and try to understand what's transpiring during these conferences, but even the product lines are in the thousands. It's breathtaking in complexity. I looked up Andy Jassy's background. It was not in technology like you. It wasn't in mathematics. He got an MBA from the Harvard Business School, and that's great. He's a brilliant man, but I've listened to him for 2 hours talk about technology. That's abnormal in today's world. In the small to medium-sized business are more guys like me, Bill. How do we keep up? Let alone, how do we make better decisions with the technology that is available to us?
Let me kind of answer your question a little bit indirectly. In the corporation today, the corporation has been trying to get around or fire their IT department for many years. First, we had bringing in consultants. Then we had going to offshore consulting. Now we have going to the cloud. And all of these moves that people are making are moves that that are trying to displace the crummy job that IT management has done. I mean, absolutely pathetic job of IT management.
Yes.
Now, another symptom of this is where the IT budget has gone. Once upon a time, the IT budget was contained in IT, and there still is some of that going on today. But in today's world, when you want to make a sale, you better be talking to somebody in marketing, sales, or finance. You better be bypassing the IT person, because the IT person has this attitude, well, we've got a backlog. It's not in the budget this year. I mean, they got every excuse in the world for not doing something innovative and new. So who you talk to and who you try to attract attention from is not the IT organization in order to sell technology. Again, marketing, sales, and finance is where your market is. And so I wish it weren't so, because when I started my career in IT, once upon a time, the IT organization prided itself on understanding the business. I have a little story to tell you, and this is, I'm not making this up. I was talking a while back to a technician in the telecommunications arena. And I'm not going to mention the name of the company or the technician because I'm not here to embarrass them. But I said something to the technician. I used the word, you're not going to believe this, but I'm telling you, I'm not making this up. I used the word customer. And the technician said, customer? Do we have customers? What's that? And I thought, oh, wait a minute. You are like in a business that doesn't even know where your paycheck is coming from,
Right.
so there has been this shift of budget. There's been a shift of control. There's been a shift of who's in charge. IT has become a caretaker organization, and the end user and business, by going to the cloud, by going to offshore processing, by going to consulting, is doing everything they can to get out from under the yoke of classical IT.
You know, Bill, when you talked about the organization a few moments ago, it reminded me that over the last 45 years that I've been in business, that the classic example is that of the need to eliminate silos. And yet we still have silos within an organization, or within many organizations, not all. I don't work for Amazon, but it sure seems that information technology is interwoven into that organization better than most companies on the planet. Netflix might be another good example, that there isn't a separation between marketing, IT, accounting, et cetera. That the IT is something that horizontally is interwoven into the organization. Is that a goal that we should have?
It's inevitable, and I know that there's the Amazons and people like that are highly dependent upon technology. But take a standard manufacturing organization or a retailing organization, even even medical organizations. Now, well, the world of medicine is kind of a different kind of world, but take those organizations. Once upon a time, those organizations existed without any technology. But in today's world, technology has got such a profound impact on their business that even if you're not an Amazon or a Yahoo or one of those kind of companies, you better be paying attention to your technology. And so the answer is absolutely yes. Those are important changes that are occurring in the world.
Should we take a deeper dive into this important focus that you have today? Your most recent books, for example, are focused on the importance of text within every organization. And can you talk to us about how it's going to impact small to medium-sized businesses?
Well,
is that an appropriate question? I should
that
ask.
certainly is an appropriate question. And the impact of, if you take a look at data, if I were to hold in my hands, this is the data in the corporation, you would find that structured data, the transaction-based data that we've been dealing with for years, is that much of something like this. We've been ignoring 85 to 90% of the data in our corporation because it's in the form of text. And
Mhm.
so what we find is, one attitude I get, well, gee, Bill, we haven't done anything with text for all these years, so maybe it's not important. And boy, when I hear somebody say that, it actually makes me really mad, because I'm now talking to somebody that's really dumb. And I don't like the word stupid. That's an ugly word, but it's stupid, because the truth of the matter is, in this other portion of the world that's gone unexplored, there is tremendous information of value. The main one is hearing the voice of your customer, hearing what your customer is saying. And businesses that don't listen to their customer, gosh, I think of Eastern Airlines, I think of Woolworths, I think of Howard Johnson's. The world is full of corporations that once upon a time were healthy, thriving, successful corporations that no longer even exist. And it's those corporations that didn't listen to the voice of your customer. People think, well, my corporation is so big that it can't happen to me. If you believe that, take a look at Kmart and Sears, and you find out that, gee, what happens when a corporation doesn't listen to the voice of a customer? It may take a while, but they are a dead corporation at that point in time.
It's
So
existential.
it's existential, absolutely.
Mhm.
And people don't believe it, and this is why, when you mentioned China a little bit earlier, quite frankly, the Chinese have an open mind. They understand what's been lost here is the connection between IT and the business. IT organization management, I don't know where they got lost along the way, but somewhere along the way, they didn't realize they were part of the business. And today, IT operates as if it's its own separate world, its own separate business.
Right.
And that's there's a lot of other problems, but that's the major problem. If we don't get this gap between IT and the business of the organization healed, then we are in for some rough times.
Yeah.
There was an article in the Wall Street Journal just this last week. In fact, I happen to have it right here. The article, it's time to get rid of the IT department, by a gentleman named Joe Papard, who's a professor at Sloan School of Management. I really, really recommend that you read the article. And what Dr. Papard is proposing is not getting rid of the IT organization, but what he's doing is transforming the IT organization so that there's going to be IT in marketing, IT in finance,
Right.
IT in sales, and so though, and once you put IT under marketing, sales, and finance, then you're going to have an alignment between the business. But as the way IT is organized today, where IT sits over in one tower and spends a lot of money, and the business sits in another tower, and they don't even talk with each other, that's not a long-term proposition.
You've made so many important points, one of which is the art of running a business is extremely difficult, and it is increasing in complexity. The other point that I heard you make, would you refer to that individual from IT in those respective departments as like an advocate, an IT professional, someone representing that other functional part of the business?
John, if I knew that, first off, I'd be happy to tell you, I don't know. It's evolving today,
Right.
and come back 5 years from now, and we'll have a better answer. I don't know.
Bill, your book, Building the Data Warehouse, was a deeply technical book for a guy like me, as I recall, back in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Is the audience for your books technical folks? The reason why I'm asking is I had mentioned Kai-Fu Lee's book, AI 2041. The audience is for the average individual. And the way he achieves that is he partners with a fiction writer who writes a story, embedding the technology into the story. And then the next chapter is Kai-Fu Lee saying, here's what you just read and what it means. Could you, I mean, you're an author. What do you think about that technique? And could that be your audience in the future?
Well, John, let me tell you what I try to do, what I've always tried to do. I haven't always succeeded, but I've always tried to do. I try to have 1 foot in technology and 1 foot in business. I can't tell you the number of business people that have read my books, and I'm always, first off, flattered when anybody reads the books. I'm flattered, but the number of business people that read my books and said, yes, this is the problem. So when I write a book, I try to write it for a dual audience, and that's actually hard to do. If I wanted to, I could write something purely technical, but I don't like to do that. I try to have a dual audience, and I don't know many writers out there in my profession that do that. I think I may be an audience of 1 in that case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So where are things headed for you professionally?
Well, right now we are working with several companies that have been very receptive to what we do. One company is called Databricks. The other company is called AtScale, and it's a delight and pleasure to work with both of them. In the month of January, the 3rd week of January, we're going to be having a symposium for the data lake that a while back, Databricks asked me as a corporation to write a book for them on the data lake, which I did. And so now we're going to be having a 5-day symposium over the internet that's coming up in January. And now I'm putting that together. We've got a lot of other things that we're doing. We're also heavily involved in medicine and healthcare. We know whether the venture capitalists recognize it, whether other corporations recognize it. The truth is that the ability to take text and put text into the form of a database is going to transform the way medical research is done. And we know that. And so we are working with a number of medical organizations on that problem. I think it's of interest to note that nearly every one of the organizations that we're working with on medicine and healthcare is outside the United States. I don't know what happened in the United States, but it pains me because I'm a patriot, I'm an American, and I love America. There's no question about that. But trying to talk with Americans is like trying to talk to a brick wall. And so we're doing a lot in medicine and healthcare. Some very exciting things to come in the future on that.
I'm so glad you shared that story. I want to come back to the definition of data warehousing and now data lake for our audience so that they understand, and then loop back to healthcare after you've explained that to us.
Surely. If you take a look at data and data architecture, you find that the world started with structured data and transaction-based systems where banks would do a deposit and a withdrawal. That's a classical transaction, but there's thousands of different kinds of transactions. An airline would take a reservation and make a reservation. That's a transaction. And that's where the world started. The second step up the ladder was to make the recognition, that text needs to be a part of the decision-making process. But there's a third type of data that's out there that is found almost everywhere, and that's machine generated data. Now, there's actually, people don't realize it, there's a lot of machine generated data that's out there. For example, I don't know if you know it, but there are these drones that fly over the parking lot of places like Walmart and Target and other places just to check how many cars are in the parking lot, because the number of cars in the parking lot are a good indication of how much sales is going to be made by the corporation. And so a drone sitting there and counting cars in a parking lot is one form of machine generated data. Another form of machine generated data, years ago when I was in Texas, my father had a ranch and we had a railroad that ran over the ranch. And there was an electronic eye that sat there and counted the number of cars that ran through my father's property. Now, these machine generated pieces of information are typically very voluminous. They generate a lot of information. And so there's that kind of data that's coming out as well. Well, a while back, the data, for whatever reason, data scientists don't like to become data managers. You know, I got to tell you a quick little aside. I don't know how many times I've talked to people that are data scientists. They say, Bill, I went to school to become a data scientist. I learned all of these algorithms. And when I get into the real world, all I do is become a data garbage man. I spend 95% of my time struggling with the data and 5% of my time actually being a data scientist. But data scientists, for whatever reason, have an attitude towards data administration and management of being smarter than them, and they don't want to get their hands dirty. Well, I got news for you. In order to do data science, you're going to have to get your hands dirty. So anyway, we find then that data scientists put all of this data in something called a data lake. And so their idea was, well, we'll just make this repository of data, put it into a data lake. And they quickly found out that you can put data into a data lake, but if you don't make it usable to people, it's not going to get used. And simply putting data into some form of a repository is a waste of time and money, because nobody uses it. Why would you want to put something where nobody can use it? So my friends at Databricks came along and they said, what we need is an infrastructure over the data lake. And the data lake, when you put an infrastructure of metadata, taxonomies, and a wide variety of data models, a wide variety of other things over the data lake, you end up with the data lake house. And people ask me, Bill, isn't a data lake house the same thing as a data warehouse? And the answer is, that's a really tough question. So let me answer it with an analogy. Suppose you had two cousins sitting in the room. You've got one cousin named John and another cousin named Mary. And you look at the cousins and you see in terms of facial structure, color of hair, body build, and probably 10 other things that indeed these people are probably closely related. That's what you normally see when you see cousins. On the other hand, are these two cousins exactly the same thing? No, Mary is a female and John is a male. Mary's DNA in some ways is fundamentally different from the DNA of John. So yes, Mary and John are closely related. Are they the same thing? No, they're not the same thing at all. So that's how I try to answer the question, is a data lake the same thing as a data warehouse? No, they're not the same thing. However, they are closely related.
You know, I have a dear friend who lives close to me in Parker, who came from Indore, India in 1999 to work for my company as a developer. back in those days, we couldn't get enough US employees. It's when that great migration started.
Hmm.
And when he left my company, he went to work for another. And the dad who started that company during World War II learned how to take aerial photographs
Hmm.
from airplanes. I think you know where I'm headed already with this story. Today, Utkal is building a new company that is working exactly with that drone data that you're referring to,
Hmm.
working with companies in India today that are inspecting windmills, as an example. So, yeah, I'm very familiar. It's fun for me to watch what he's doing as he builds out that technology.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And that's a whole new world. Data scientists disdain for data administration. I kind of liken it to going to the hospital and having an operation. If you go to the hospital and have an operation, you have the surgeon and you have the anesthesiologist.
Right.
And now there's no way the anesthesiologist knows everything that the surgeon knows. The surgeon knows whatever the surgeon is a specialist in and knows. But the surgeon knows they need the anesthesiologist to keep the patient alive
Yeah.
during the operation. And so there's a symbiotic relationship between the anesthesiologist and the surgeon. Uh, one of these days, we're going to wake up and the data scientist is going to recognize that it's true that the data administrator does not have the body of knowledge the data scientist has, but the data scientist needs the data administrator in order to keep the patient alive during the operation.
Mm-hmm. So, what are some other examples that you can use of extracting from text unstructured data and then therefore making better business decisions today? Can you give us,
Oh, I've got another really good example.
please?
When we first started, the first thing that we ever attempted to look at were corporate contracts. I can't
Mm-hmm.
tell you the number of times I've sat in an audience of executives and say, "Ma'am, sir, do you know what's in your corporate contracts?" And
Mm-hmm.
to date, not one person, not one corporation has ever stood up and said, "Yes, we know what's in our corporate contract." And I said, "Well," and I said, "Wait a minute, I'm confused here. Aren't you, as an executive, in charge of liability?" "Oh, yeah, we're in charge of liability." "Well, don't you think there's liability in your corporate contracts?" Yeah, there might be." "So how can you tell me with a straight face that you're in charge of liability and don't know what's in your corporate contracts?" And it's this point in time that people kind of look at the floor and mumble. And whenever people look at the floor and mumble, you've asked an embarrassing question. But the truth of the matter is, people don't know what's in their corporate contracts, and why? Because corporate contracts are in the form of text, and people have the attitude, the notion that because it's in the form of text, the computer can't handle it. And that's simply, in today's world, that may have been true 5 years ago. That may have been true 10 years ago. That's not true today. Now, trying to sell people on managing corporate contracts is like trying to sell caskets. Every one of us someday is going to need a casket, but nobody buys that I know of buys a casket before they need it. And so these corporations just sitting there waiting there. And by the way, there's lots of other cases of a business value to be gathered from text, but corporate contracts is one that is absolutely pregnant and viable.
Bill, you might not be aware that after spending 30 years in information technology, I went on staff with the American Cancer Society and did so for a period of 14 years. I retired 4 years ago, but continue to work for the Extramural Grants Department, which since 1942 has gifted $5 billion to invest in research. and it's usually the young people just graduating with a PhD and or an MD and can't yet be funded by the federal government. It has been so effective in its manual form that 49 of those individuals have gone on to win the Nobel Prize.
Mhm.
And one of the uniquenesses, only the Department of Defense does this, like the American Cancer Society. They use someone like me and they call us a stakeholder. We represent you, the community. And my job is to make sure that money is well spent. But my vote counts equally. And so between now and the end of January, I'll spend several hours a day reading those grant applications in preparation for that.
Mhm.
And I can tell you that the system that I've put together somewhat manually is in reading it, about every other word I'm having to look up, and I look up a word and have to look up another one to more fully understand the term. It's so complex. So the complexity is going to drive that need. We know that AI will ultimately be used, and is to a certain degree today, to help in drug discovery. You probably are aware of even other examples in healthcare, but this is one where we're trying to find the best new research. What does
Mhm.
that look like? And so there's an example of text that
Yep.
where it could be extracted and used to make better decisions.
Yep. Absolutely. And let me give you a quick, small example. I was working many years ago at the Mayo Clinic, and one day the doctors at the Mayo Clinic were talking about something. They were talking about the HA problem. Well, I'm not a doctor, but I thought the HA problem, that's kind of strange. I've never heard of that before. So I asked them. I said, "What's the HA problem?" They said, "Well, when you're reading doctor's notes and you run across the term HA, you have to understand which doctor wrote it.
Yeah.
Because if a cardiologist wrote it, it means heart attack. If a
Mhm.
general practitioner wrote it, it means headache. If an endocrinologist wrote it, it means hepatitis A." And so when you're reading these textual notes, you've got to know who wrote the document in order to interpret it properly. And because if you don't, you'll read something as headache when it really meant heart attack, and that of course doesn't do anybody any good.
It's what you've taught me in your writings, the topic of context.
The oh, okay.
Mhm.
And John, I can tell you, having spent the last 20 years of my life doing this kind of thing, 10% of the battle is text, and 90% of the battle is context. Context is infinitely more difficult than text is.
Mhm. Yeah, and that kind of takes me back to, last month was that focus on China. So context in terms of country. Another member, Sue May Rotra, is going to take us through the country of India in January. And I just think it's important in trying to get a better perspective, a broader perspective of our organizations, how they fit in. That's contextual as well.
Mhm.
And so, you know, studying you over the last couple of weeks too really helped me have a better perspective.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So, do you have a book right now that you're in the middle of writing, and are you taking a next step here?
Actually, no, I do not. Although I do have a quick little story for you, I've written right now, published 62 books, and my sister is also a writer, and she's published 28 books. We believe, and we're going to write the Guinness Book of World Records. We think that as a brother and sister pair, we probably published more books than anybody. I'm not
Wow.
aware of anybody that published more. Now, my sister is publishes in a completely different field. I'm not even going to tell you what she publishes, but she publishes something. I'd say this much: she's got her own fan club, and last year she won a National Book Award. And anyway, to brag on her, she didn't start writing until she was 65 years old. She retired from teaching school and one day sat down and said, I want to become a writer. And now she's published 28 books.
Could we talk a little bit about that, the discipline of writing? You know, I would think a little bit of, not a little bit, a lot of this was the fact that you were creating new ways of thinking early on.
Well, let me summarize two things. Whatever you write, whoever you are, what kind of writing you want to do, if it isn't interesting to you, it's not going to be interesting to your reader. So
Right.
number one, you've got to make it interesting. That's the cardinal rule of writing. Number two, if you want to write a book and you have the attitude, well, I'll write a book when I get around to it, you're never going to write that book. That the way that you write a book is, the way I write a book is, I sit down and I clear my desk, I clear my mind, and I sit down and I write, and I write until I finish the book. And I don't wait till I have time. I have to make time. So making time is the way that I write, and making time is the way I write. But the other cardinal rule is, and I don't care whether you're writing a mystery or I don't care what you're writing. If it's not interesting to you, it's not going to be. Now, is it going to be interesting to everybody in the world? No. And again, I don't care who you are. You're not going to write something that's interesting to everybody. But it's going to be interesting to some people that are trying to solve the problems you're solving. Then yes. So you've got to make it interesting, and you've got to make time for it. When people, I get people to come to me all the time saying, I want to be a writer. And I always try to help people that want to be a writer. Some of them actually do write books and go on to have careers. Most of them simply think that writing's an interesting idea, and they have the attitude, well, I'll write when I have time. And when I hear that, I know what's going to happen. I know they're not going to write a book.
You're on a mission to affect change in the world of information technology as it relates to business.
You bet
How
I
would
am.
you summarize that as we kind of come to a close in our discussion today?
Well, I talk and write and speak and work in the world. I try to tell the non-technician that there is technical help that's available, and I try to tell the technician that they ought to be thinking about the business. Now, some people, that message gets through to some people, that message does not get through to a lot of people. But I take the wins where I find them, and I save. I'll tell you something. Do I think time is on my side? Absolutely, time is on my side. Time and history are going to show that indeed business and technology need to be closely married to each other. So, am I preaching the right chorus? I'm preaching the right chorus. Does everybody listen? I'm fully aware. A lot of people don't. They want to hear it. A lot of people are locked in to this way of thinking, and there's nothing you're going to say that's ever. It's like religion. I'm trying to tell somebody that their religion is wrong and bad. That's not a very effective way. You're not going to win many converts doing that.
Right. So it begins with respect of that other individual. You've got to respect where they're at this moment in time as a starting point, I would think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you gotta recognize, if 10% of the people I talk to actually get the message, that's a good day for me. I recognize 90% of people are so trained into the locked in, they have myopia, and they're not willing to even think that there's something outside of their range of vision.
Let's talk a little bit about the new normal and as you look forward to 2022, we've got the new South African variant that we have to take into consideration today. And I know that I'm going to have to implement the technology for our group meetings, that if someone is headed out on an important trip, they may not want to be in person this particular week and choose to sign in remotely because they don't want a positive test if they're taking their family out of the country and need to be negative. And you have historically done a lot of travel, but over the last 18 months, you've done a lot of Zoom presentations, and some I think are just conference calls, if I'm not mistaken. What does it look like for you in 2022?
Well, let me tell you something. You mentioned the word Zoom. I'm in love with Zoom. Zoom has saved me so much money, so much time, not having to put up with what you go through at the airport. That I love Zoom because you can still be present and available and have a conversation with somebody and not be in their physical presence. And 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, I gave a presentation in China, in India, and in Peru, all in the same week. And you can't. I don't believe. I don't know. I don't think it's possible to physically go to India, China, and Peru all in the same week and do work. It may be, but if it is, it sure isn't comfortable.
Right. Right. So what I just heard you say is you're going to do more Zoom in 2022 and be on an airplane less, correct?
I've got one friend of mine, a very close and dear friend of mine, that asked me to attend a conference, and I'm going to do it because he's a close and dear friend.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'm going to do everything by Zoom. So I try to stay away from airports as much as I can.
Yeah. Yeah. But this I know about you, you love people as well, and human contact is vitally important to all of us, so that but we're just going to have to pick and choose those times more carefully.
Yep. And like I said, the one in the year 2022, on the one plane trip that I know I'm taking, I'm doing it because of a friendship that I had with somebody else. Anybody else would have asked me, I'd have said, we'll do it by Zoom. But he said, Bill, there's this conference you need to attend, so I will attend.
That's great. Are there any questions that I should have asked you today that you'd like to discuss before we wind down?
No, you've asked about my my early life, and I have a story.
Yes.
I'm not sure this. Well, okay, this is inappropriate. Okay, it's a true story.
Yeah.
When I was in Louisiana, at Shreveport, Kirby's golf course, I was making $350 a month. I had to stay in a boarding house, and we had to pay 75 cents a day in the boarding house, and and that's what I could afford. So, when I would go to work in the morning, sitting next to me was another house, and there would be these young women out on the veranda, and I got to be friends with them. And they'd say, "Well, Bill, what'd you shoot today?" And I got to be. They were the only people that I had that were my age. They were friendly, and then one night on a hot summer night, I had to go open the window, and when I did, I looked over into the other house, and that's when I found out what they did for a living. And I have to say it was a lesson in life for me, because I didn't know these women for what their profession was. I knew these women as nice people my age that I could talk with, and they were friendly. And I thought, gee, that's kind of a different perspective than most people have. But yes, I lived on a place called Stoner Street in Shreveport, Louisiana, in a boarding house, and I got out of there the minute that I got this job at Western Electric as a programmer, I moved out of the boarding house. But anyway, that was one of my adventures from my early career.
Bill Inmon, my goal today, as you know, was that our audience would get to know you as an individual, because so many of those recorded presentations are you delivering information, vital information to groups of people, but they didn't get to know you. And we got to know a little bit about you today. And I'm super grateful for that. Thank you. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for taking the time. It's been a real gift.
Thank you, John. My pleasure.
Okay. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.